Does your event management software come with a team of event and hospitality pros? Ours does. Concierge.com by Condé Nast is a full-service registration and guest management solution focused on creating an exceptional guest experience. From customized invites, registration, and itineraries to travel booking, communication, and on-site check-in, the Concierge.com team handles everything using our ingenious guest management software. Visit Concierge.com to see how we can help you and how we can make every guest feel like a VIP.
Are you a follower?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna probably add.
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
This week on GatherGeeks, we welcome back Tahira Endean. She is a Vancouver-based event producer who last joined us in 2016 in a conversation from IMEX America. Now she has written a new book called Intentional Event Design, Our Professional Opportunity. The book is a guide for event professionals that addresses bigger picture thinking about events. Along the way, she tackles some of the hottest topics in events, from embracing tech to thinking about wellness and more. Event planners have to be masters of logistics, but Tahira points out that there has to be a bigger picture driving the strategy behind the event, and she tells us how to get there. Once you've thought that through, then you can translate that into event design. She spoke with David recently, and we're going to present that conversation to you now. Please take a listen.
Hi, Tahira. How are you today?
I'm so excellent, David. How are you?
Doing really, really well, and I'm really excited to see your book, the International Event Design book. And I was so intrigued. Why did you decide to write this book?
So after I finished my really big project this year, I was looking for something that I had written. And over the last couple of years, I've talked with other people about writing books. And, everyone gets busy. It's hard to do that follow-up. And I couldn't find what I was looking for. And I thought, I really just want to put what I think about events and event design and what's important into one place, good or bad, attributable to me. And so I started to pull together some of the information. And someone said to me a little bit snarkily, they're like, to have a book, you have to have 50,000 words. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. So I started pulling information together, and it turned out that I had 55,000 words. And I thought a lot of them are duplicated, and a lot of them are things I don't want to talk about, so I don't want to write about them. And so I started from there. And as I started to really frame it, I had lots of conversations with people. So every section of this book has been vetted by somebody who really is an expert in their field to say, yeah, this is on track, and we're so glad you're writing this book. So it evolved over sort of about 6
What I like about it is that you can read it on many, many levels. You can skim it and see the headlines in the sections. It's very easily readable. It's very readable, and it also makes you pull out what you need when you need it too.
That is perfect. What I'm actually really enjoying about it is that when I've been out and talking about it is that it's changing the conversations people are having. And they're telling me that later that, we had a conversation that was different than a conversation we've had before at an industry event. We're having different conversations with our clients now. That's what I want, is for us to be able to reframe what the event industry is and to have tools to do that.
So why don't you let's go through I want to kind of make this a little bit of a master class for people that are either in the industry or are just starting in the industry. But even for me, rereading this and sort of seeing your framework really taught me some of the basics that I forgot about, that I wasn't thinking about. And so if you can go into what are the intentions, just quickly go into each one to give us the broadest possible stroke.
Sure. Well, the very first intention is really the premise of the book is that it's about trust. So I look very briefly at some things like sustainability is literally one page. We live on one planet. Let's all take care of it. Then the first intention really is around people-centric, purpose-driven design. So, which is exactly what it says. It's at the end of the day, we're planning events for people. How do we make it so that it's the most worthwhile, potentially transformative experience when they're there? How do we explain our value that we're bringing to that process? And then really looking at, technology is something that we talk about all the time. And it's very easy to have platitudes around technology and to plop technology on top of things, but really looking at how we integrate and embrace it.
So that's intention 2?
That's intention 2.
Okay, what's intention 3?
Intention 3 is designing for the optimal brain experience, which is something I, am deeply passionate about. We all arrive with a brain, and we have to take care of them.
Intention 4? I'm trying to speed you along so we get the bigger picture, and then we can go back into the details.
Perfect. Optimizing learning and performance. Intention 5 is space flow and seating design. Intention 6 is taking that even deeper into 5 senses design. And the final intention 7, is wellness. And not just wellness for our participants, but for us. Because we can't take care of people until we've taken care of ourselves.
So going back to intention 1, you made people-centric, purpose-driven design number 1.
Yeah.
Why is that the thing that is number 1? And is it something that you're not seeing in other events or other planning?
I think we are definitely seeing it in some events. And there's still many events where we're so doing the same thing in the same way that we've always done it, that we are not thinking about how people have evolved and how we've evolved very rapidly in this digital age, and that we have the same needs that humans have always had around our basic care, but we also have these new needs that are related to, arriving with a supercomputer and also still having this deep, deep need for human connection, and really looking at how do we, when we're spending tens of thousands or millions of dollars on events, that it's not about what the decor is. It's about the entire environment and how that is going to drive conversations between people.
On page 14, you say the people-centric principles are: 1, businesses invest in events because they provide a catalyst for behavior change leading to business growth. I mean, it seems like, with 25% of all marketing now event-oriented, and every business in the world looking at new levels of collaboration and learning and development, every part of the human gathering at a business or even on a social level is important.
Every part of it's important. I mean, and this is something that you and I really agree on, David, is that it's not about, when we talk about success at an event, is not the number of leads you've generated to me. It's the number of quality conversations that you've had.
Absolutely.
And I really feel that it's our responsibility to provide the catalyst for that when we're doing events, social or otherwise, because we all know that a lot of business is done at what we seemingly call social events.
Yep. And the second principle that you said, I'm trying to go from the business side of like what is the stakeholder on the business side to the attendee. I mean, the participants, this number 2, this is what you said. Participants attend events because we crave face-to-face opportunities for learning and intelligent conversation with like-minded individuals. I mean, these are the 2 basic core fundamentals that you're building off of, it seems like.
Well, they are, because, we're not going to have events unless businesses invest in them. And that's a really key factor. And we're not going to have events if we don't create spaces that people feel are valuable.
And the next part you go into is the whole idea of creating model generation, which is a new thought, I think, for our industry. But you're actually prototyping these things before they're ever happening. It's product design more than anything else, right?
Definitely. So the event model generation is a process, that you and many of the people listening will be familiar with, which, comes out of Europe with Ruud and Roel and Dennis developing really just a framework, a design process specific to events that gives us a fundamental basis for looking at our stakeholder needs. And by stakeholder, not just meeting owner, but also the various groups that are going to participate in it. And I think that once you have a framework and a process and a place to go back to consistently, particularly in large organizations where you're doing multiple events in over the course of a year or longer, having consistency is going to continue to, because it's not about having a consistency in that your events are the same. It's about having a consistent framework so you understand what you need to do in designing your events to meet those needs, because you have taken the time to drill down to what those needs are.
Do you think that we do that? For years, we've done that intuitively, right?
I think we've somewhat done it intuitively. Part of the challenge that we have is we have an industry that's also based on hierarchical layers. So, you will quite often have a meeting owner who's at an organization, and then an agency who also then hires other agencies to do specific tasks. And there's quite often that missing link to what the owner really wants. So going through a process that owner has signed off on, these are my objectives and this is what I want, allows that agency level in particular to really articulate, or even an internal meeting planner to articulate better to all of those other many partners, those collaborators that we lean on, to articulate what's important. You always have to make decisions in events about how you're spending your budget, about what venues you're choosing, about what kind of entertainment you're going to have, what your flow of your everything is going to be, your space and your meals and your education. And all of those are going to be slightly different with every event. So being able to articulate why you're doing them a specific way.
Right. I mean, you're coming down to really very smart planning, which is what the second name, the bad name for event planning is called event planning.
It's true, because we don't spend, and it's very much, this book is not about logistics. It's about the bigger picture thinking behind the logistics, and about understanding why we need to have strategies in place, and why that's also that's a hard-earned thing. You don't just pop up one day and are event planner.
Absolutely.
Which is, and that's the biggest challenge. One of the biggest challenges we face, right, is we have, we have no barrier to entry. Everybody thinks it looks pretty easy. And when you start actually doing it, it takes, I would say, 2 to 5 years to even understand what it takes to produce a whole event well. And then after that, you can start to have some fun with it.
Right. I mean, you talk about. I always believe that an event organizer is kind of the mayor of their eco community that they just set up. And
absolutely.
You talk about you're growing it through the community. You want people to sort of come back to this village that you've created.
We really do, don't we? Because what's the easiest way to plan an event is to have a successful first event and have so many people that want to come back the second time because of that community that you've built. When you're starting with a good foundation of people, what an amazing place to start from.
And you also talk, what is Dunbar's Law you talk about in the book, which I find fascinating. This is kind of a fundamental as well. Dunbar's
Law is from a man named Robin Dunbar, and it's based on this idea that your largest community can be 150 people. So in your life, at any point in time, you'll sort of have 5 people that are very close to you. You'll have 15 people who are part of your core, and those people will shift over time as you change jobs, or move roles within an organization, or move to a new community, or go to an event. When you're at an event, you're going to sort of have your core people who you're going to spend that time with. You're going to have some ancillary people that you keep seeing as you go through the course of the event. And as you start to meet other people, really about the biggest you can get to is 150. I saw Janet Sperstad speak recently, and she added a number to this, which I love, which is 35. And 35 is about exactly the right number to have for a house party. So, because what happens is that with 35 people, you're always going to have people that you know and are comfortable with, and also people that are new and make it interesting. And that's why we go to face-to-face events, is so that we can have comfortable conversations, and so that we can also have things that become our new disruptors and our new takeaways and our new aha moments with people that we wouldn't have met otherwise. But when we start to take an event of 10,000 people, you also need to think about, how do I break it down into these smaller communities? You're not going to go somewhere and meet 10,000 people.
So that begs the question. In less than a couple minutes, how do you do that?
Well, you know what? That is a great question. So it starts really, when you look at building serendipity into your event. So that can start with housing. When you're booking your hotel groups, putting people into properties where they are with their like-minded groups within that larger organization, so that you're going to have more of those opportunities for those lobby sightings or those, hallway sightings of people. What if you have, when you start to do your sessions, in your session planning, it's about, how do you create sessions that are going to attract people who have a similar interest, but then not just doing, that stage from the stage talking, but how do you create within that learning and performance design, how do you create opportunities for people to talk to each other? So, we know that there's different ways of learning. So there's, one to many, one to few, peer to peer. And what we're also finding is that the younger our demographic skews, we know that one of the big things for all generations, but specifically for younger generations, is that peer-to-peer trust. So the more opportunities that we can create for those smaller conversations to happen, for true moving from, it's a tough word, but moving a connection to a more intimate connection. And by intimate, we just mean a place of trust, not a place of intimacy in the traditional sense, but where you can have a deeper conversation in a trusted environment. That's how we build communities. And it's those relationships that are going to make people come back year over year over year to an association. So you're going to go and meet new people, but really what draws you in, back in that little heartstring way is, I get to see, if I can go to something where you are, David, I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to see David. That's amazing. And I look forward to that.
So an event organizer really has to be a tribal, someone that can birth tribes, basically mini tribes among the big tribe.
Yeah. You know what? That's exactly what we are.
And it's about the connectivity and the connection. And it seems like that, the whole new trend of activating new spaces in ways, using decor and lighting, sign, and design is really the purpose of that. And it's not to look pretty.
It's, it has to look good. And it has to look good because as human beings, we like things that are beautiful. So a well-designed event still needs to have great visual appeal. And then you're right, exactly. We have that opportunity to create different types of spaces that are going to create comfort for different experiences to happen, and for different groups to be comfortable in, and for different things to happen in those spaces. A networking evening space should look and feel very different than a daytime learning space. You still should have some basics of, your seating design shouldn't, include rounds of 10 that are completely not conducive to conversation, but still ubiquitous at galas, to, a classroom learning environment. But how do it's again about how do we get people to talk to each other? When we start to build a trade show, it's about how do you get people to not walk down an aisle after aisle after aisle, feeling a little bit like they're in a grocery store, only looking at the middle level and averting their eyes from logos they're not so interested in, to a much more open environment where people are actually making eye contact with people because they're at the same level and can then have conversations. And those are the conversations that are going to drive business results.
It comes down to, this reminds me of, when your first day of school, and the people you sit with in your row, let's say you're going into your homeroom in junior high school all of a sudden, and all the people that have the same last name letter as you because you're hanging around them, and they become your buds.
Yes, that's so true. And I remember as a kid, my maiden name was Smith, and I remember thinking my whole life, I wish that I had a last name that started with like E, and then I ended up marrying somebody who had the last name that started with E because I just wanted to be closer to the front of the alphabet in school.
Well, I had A. I was always number one or number two. It was kind of terrifying, actually.
Yeah.
You also go into sort of event marketing. It's a big buzzword now, but it seems like event marketing is more important than ever, but the end result is still the same, trying to find tribes who want to be part of what you want to do. And that's become a skill set in its own. It used to be just sending out an invitation.
And event marketing has changed so much. So I think there's two things of it, right? There's marketing your event, which is actually the marketing of your event, which is a whole new skill set that, a whole new digital skill set that really needs to be learned. And then there is using event marketing where you're using an event as one tool in your marketing toolkit. And you're right. When you get to those numbers, if that's 20% of your budget, you need to be doing that really smartly. Right. And you need to be looking at how do you use those opportunities to their maximum value? And we see, I plan a very large technology conference, but I could literally go to a technology conference once or twice a week in my own city. So there's a lot of competition out there for events and using them as marketing tools. So how do we get better at that? How do we create those iconic experiences that people want to be part of? And again, that really does come down to that tribe building, listening to what your stakeholders want, really being clear about how you create spaces that are going to make them comfortable. And also, how do we allow space and time in between things so that we're not so concerned with jam packing everything that people don't talk to each other? Because that really defeats the purpose of being people-centric. We might be purpose-driven in that I'm messaging, content, but it's not people-centric because we can only absorb so much. I think I talk in the book about how, you can learn for sort of 11 minutes at a time before you need to do something to contextualize or reflect on that information.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I know that I bore everybody with my feeling about how social physics is so important. And that it's all about sort of the inputs, the outputs. It's about inspiring and then exploring. It's all about making it so this experience is completely transformational, and it's not the same old, same old.
And otherwise, why would you go back?
Right. Yeah. The whole thing is why go back? I mean,
and so some people are going to go back because you have continuing education unit credits that you need to, achieve to continue to stay on in a career, whether it's some kind of a professional service or even in our industry, having your CMP, you need to get a certain amount of credits education hours.
Have you done any sort of research or feeling about how fast does an attendee make a judgment?
Oh, in about 6 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, and what do you think is the number one thing that you look at and you say, oh no, this isn't for me? Do you have any sense of it? Have a beat on that?
Yes, I have some opinions on it.
Yeah, opinions,
sure.
It's fine. We all have opinions and we know what that means.
Yeah. So, I mean, it starts, from a marketing perspective, it starts with how easy is it to get into your website. But from an event perspective, it really starts with that arrival point. And we are not always that good at arrival points. Sometimes that's venue driven, as in, you can't, set up anything in the lobby of this space. This is our public space. Your event starts at this line. And so we need to sort of create from that line. I think that sometimes we work so hard at being edgy, people going in back doors or loading bays or loading elevators, that while that seems really cool when you're thinking about it, does it really fundamentally create a sense of arrival that makes you feel excited when you get there, that makes you want to keep going in and see more and exploring and seeing who's there and seeing what you're going to have to talk about and seeing what kind of food or entertainment experiences you might have. And it really is from that very first point. And part of that first point is human touch. So when you get somewhere and there's not good wayfinding and there's nobody to help you and it's not comfortable, then you're kind of on edge when you start. And that really is a less than 6 second experience.
Have you studied, based on this book, the social anxiety issues that are going on with people? Are you able to sort of lean into that?
Yeah, definitely. I actually write quite a bit about that in a little bit later in the book with accessibility, because accessibility to me isn't people arriving in wheelchairs. It's people arriving who are introverts. It's people who are arriving with social anxiety, which is so common. And again, it's that somebody smiling at you can take the edge off of that social anxiety. Having, people who are really focused on introducing people to other people, having a name badge that says, talk to me about X, once you get over the anxiety of choosing what that X is, those are conversation starters.
That's a really good point. I'm trying to bring back the reception line at events, because usually people don't even get to meet any of the principals. And I believe that the corporate executives are some of the worst hosts in the world, and that they need to actually get off their butts and go and talk to people at their events. And they don't.
And, and part of that, I think that's sometimes those people also have social anxiety.
Yeah.
So, how do we make them feel comfortable? But you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the reason that you go to an event, even a staff holiday party, isn't because you're so excited to go and hang out with people you work with all the time again. You go for that access to those senior executives, and you go for access to people from other departments. And so just sitting at a table with the people that you sit with around your cubicle environment every day really defeats that purpose. And whereas we have an opportunity to create new relationships and new bonds between people with just a little thoughtful planning about how you encourage people to interact, or how you, in some cases, force people to interact, but in a way that doesn't feel so forced.
So let's go. The next section, we're only on page 29 of this book. There's like hundreds of other pages, and this is so rich with information. It is a textbook, it's a manual, it is a how-to, it's everything. But if you're new to the industry and you're listening to this podcast, and you, what are some of the things I hear you're pointing out what to do, and how to sort of be humble and learn the business and things like that. You want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that it's really important to, when you come in new to any industry, which is going to happen at some point in everybody's life, whether it's your first job when you're 18 or later when you're in your 20s, or when you change careers later, it is staying humble. It's understanding that you are hopefully surrounding yourself with people who have more experience. It's a little bit about staying in your own lane.
What do you mean by that? Go into that. What is that? I read that in that, like, staying in your own lane means what?
Your own lane, to me, means that we need to pick areas of specialty, and we need to then focus on those areas of specialty. And we get so many companies who are, we're good at everything. Nobody's good at everything. So once so it's a little bit of being a bit of a generalist with events and understanding what you need for a whole event. But then it's really about finding those specialists, those great lighting designers, those great caterers, those great, venue managers, those, whatever it might be.
Can you go through those? You have a little interesting section on what are the lanes. You have
what are those
who's
lanes?
In charge, the idea of what the concept of a client is.
Yeah. So there is always that, isn't there? So you always have to deal with the client. So I talk
even
about
internally, right? Even internally. I mean, it's not like you're a third party planner. It's like your client is your business unit. Your client is somebody.
Everybody, you know what? As an event manager, everybody has a client. You can't get away from it. And you're right. It could be your own business unit. It could be your manager. It could be your CEO. It could be multiple CEOs. What I talk about in here is really looking at the different kinds of roles that we need to have now. And not we all know we need housing and registration and super important pieces like that. But in this new digital age and this new age of transparency and of defining our own value, we do need some different things. So a business event strategist is sort of this new terminology that's being thrown out.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Because when I was I'm friendly with people from Jack Morton and George B. Johnson, and they actually take the event strategist and they separate it out from the creative directors.
They do. So because the event and that's exactly right. So people who are generally very good at defining what your business needs are and deciding how an event can help support those business needs often are very good at data and very good at managing teams and very good at managing up. This is a really important role because you do need to really be able to manage clients and make clients feel comfortable and make them feel comfortable that you understand their business needs. And if that business happens to be a wedding, then you need to understand all of those people who are that client. And the creative is a little bit different. A creative mind set isn't always going to also be a great business manager, and that's okay. It's about understanding that it's okay, that's okay. Sometimes you're going to have an account executive as well. Sometimes it depends on the size of the client and the size of the project. You might have a meeting planner or event producer.
What's the difference between those two? I mean, there's a huge conversation we can have around that.
There is a huge conversation around that. To me, a meeting planner is more focused on literally, conferences, whereas event production is really more about creating the things like the general sessions and social events and overarching production pieces, a little bit less overall logistics. Like as an event producer, I've been both. And so, one is a little bit going to be more focused on all of those basics, your venue, registration, hospitality, hotels, those really core functions. Whereas a producer is going to do a little bit more of that creative.
Doesn't everyone need project management skills?
Everyone needs project management skills.
And what does that mean?
It means that you need to be able to, and again, this comes back to that experience, right, and that learning. You can't be a good project manager on your first project because you can't possibly understand all of those elements. So project management is something that you need a bit of time to understand the various roles that are going to go into an event. And then you need to be able to probably dabble and try some of those roles, figure out, what your lane is, the things that you love, where you want to go forward. And when you start to get into, sort of, again, that 2 to 5 years, stepping back and being able to look at overall what an event needs, assigning roles and timelines and milestones, and really looking at how do you drive all of the decision-making that you need from your stakeholders towards those milestones so that you can then continue to do the 87 tasks that support any milestone.
Go through, like, if you want to be a project manager, like, what are the tools that you should be experts in? Like, do you need to know Asana, and you need to know Basecamp, and you need to know all those things? Like, what do you use, and how do you teach?
I've used all of those things. So we've used Asana, we've used Basecamp. We're currently trying Event Collab. So it's interesting to go through that learning curve of new technologies. We seem to do that every year. So I would just say you need to have a tool. Whatever tool it is that you think is going to work for you and your teams is the tool that you need to have. And then understanding where that project manager fits, because and the scope of the project, does that scope of the project require that you have a project manager who really that is their only job, is to manage those projects, because that can be an all-consuming role, and that's not something that we give any value to. It's something that organizations give a lot of value to for many projects, but they don't tend to think of events as being large. Ironically, I find a lot of people don't understand the complexity of a large event and that it actually is a project. They just think, well, you can just do that off the side of your desk.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest mistake I think people make, is they underestimate the complexity.
The complexity and the amount of time. It's just like, people are like, okay, you need to raise sponsorship. Okay, great. So for every sponsor that I'm going to raise money from, it is going to take me at 6 to 10 touch points.
So I'm gonna read you we talk about complexity. In this book, you have some of the sort of the titles of some of the topics. You have an executive creative producer. You have a technical director. You have a set design and decor person per group, probably. Content producers, script writers, masters of ceremony, moderators, conference weavers or storytellers, facilitators, an AV team, a technical show caller, a lighting director, a lighting operations person, an audio person, a video person, camera operators, stage managers and stage assistant managers, breakout rooms, UX designers, virtual and hybrid team additions, digital event specialists, broadcast producers, hybrid hosts, virtual audience hosts or moderators, roles related to story extensions, graphic storytellers, social media team, and it goes on and on and on. I mean, there are 5 million events in the world, according to some of the things I've read. That means 5 million event teams.
Yes, I think there's actually more than that. There's something like, 8 million events a year that happen in the US and the UK and the So yes, in Asia and.
The numbers are hard to figure out. I mean,
I know.
It's whatever someone says that usually is wrong.
So all we know is that there's lots of them, and that most, when a client hires you, whether you're, again, an internal or an agency planner, strategist, whatever that role is, when they hire you, they don't think when they get on site that it's going to take a team of 60 people to manage your event. And they can't, they see all of these people sort of running around, but nobody understands that all of those people have been working on various components of your event leading up to that. All of those human resources have a cost. And every time that they make a change, that, one change that they think is very simple could mean engaging with 5 different people that then take 15 hours to implement what they considered a very small change. We'd like things to, be blue instead of green. We're changing our tagline. We've all had those things happen, and understanding that there's this whole rollout that goes along with it. And that in order to have a really great event that, again, is transformative, that's worthwhile, it's a worthwhile investment for your participants, for your stakeholders, for the person paying for the event, or the number of people paying for the event, that we really need to understand that it takes a lot to make that happen. And it takes a lot to make it happen in terms of having all of these different, you're not going to have all of these roles, but every event is going to have a good number of these roles to make it successful. And then you also how do we define our value as an industry? Well, our value as an industry should be that we are consistently driving business value for our organizations because we are creating time and space and programming and message delivery in a way that is going to make people think differently. So from when they come in, they're entering behavior, to when they leave, they're exiting behavior. They've had something happen because of that magic that you have created in between those two spaces, that will help their businesses or your business.
Well, I think also I would broaden it more than business. When we say business, I think that any event that you do, you want to have these kind of outcomes, whether it's a personal event or whether it's a fundraising event or a training event. The business is of whatever business you're trying to promote in a sense, and whatever feeling, it still comes down to Maya Angelou, right?
Yes. How you make them feel.
How you make them feel. So Tahira, how do people get intentional event design? This is an incredible piece of work, which I think is helping to move the industry forward in ways that you probably don't even imagine.
I hope that it does. I think that would be amazing. It's available on Amazon. So there's a Kindle version as well as a paper version. And it being available on Amazon means that it's available anywhere in the world. So, which is great. And it is actually changing the conversations people are having. I'm always happy. One of my favorite things I did this year was a dinner with the author. So we did a smaller dinner was a familiarization tour. And when people didn't want to leave, we just had so many great conversations about the things that they could incorporate to improve their events that didn't cost more money, that just required a bit of a rethink and a bit of a repositioning with their clients. And so you can find me pretty soon. There's going to be a website, but not quite yet. So Tahira Loves Events at gmail.com always finds me. So it's super simple.
Well, thank you so much. You are a huge asset to our industry. I adore working with you always, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Let's talk about more. I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, David and Tahira. I was amazed that she said an attendee can make a judgment about your event in 6 seconds. So no pressure, everyone. Well, I hope that you heard that, you can always take a moment to check in with yourself and ask, how am I doing and how can I improve? So please check out her book on Amazon and let us know what you think. Tahira is part of BizBash's LinkedIn group, Event Planners Gather. So I thought I'd highlight that for our listeners this week. If you are listening to this podcast, you obviously care deeply about events. So continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn, where we have nearly 70,000 members in that group. You can crowdsource questions, do some networking, and interact with our editors on future stories. So check that out and check us out next week. We'll be back with another episode of GatherGeeks. Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter at GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. This episode is sponsored in part by Concierge.com. Event management software is supposed to save you time, but it rarely does. What you really need is event management software that comes with a team of event and hospitality pros. Concierge.com by Condé Nast offers ingenious registration and guest management software along with the people you need to manage it all. Go to Concierge.com to see how we can help you and how we make every guest feel like a VIP. This episode is also sponsored by Event Leadership Institute. Invest in yourself and your staff with self-paced online event education designed to fit into your busy schedule. Subscribe to the Event Leadership Institute for only $25 per month and gain access to an extensive on-demand video library of classes, as well as interviews with industry leaders. Best of all, you can watch classes in small pieces or all at once. For more information, visit eventleadershipinstitute.com.